effective auto-tagging being used at this level. Auto-tagging, of course, is a very high maturity system, also very, very complex, difficult to get working in a useful way, but if you can get in place, there are a number of very, very fundamental advantages. So that really gives us a very quick overview of the scale and the changes that occur across the various levels in SharePoint maturity here. But let's just talk a little bit about what the data looks like. This is, of course, based on the publicly available data that you can get through the SharePoint maturity website. And this is also the reason why I do strongly encourage anybody who's interested to share their data back into the community, because it makes statistical information like this so much more useful to all of us. But the key point I want you to take away from this diagram here, as you look around the axes and you see how search looks to be fairly mature around about level 300 here, while integration and insight seems to be very, very low, almost down at 50 points, so under the basic level. The key thing to take away here is that SharePoint maturity is not something that's going to come all at once. It's not something that's going to happen at the same rate in every area. And you are going to primarily see this happening because organizational needs across your various areas are going to be quite different. And that's going to impact maturity. So organizations that need a lot of integration with external systems are obviously going to see more mature SharePoint usage within the areas that are closely linked to that. And organizations who don't need to do that, well, those areas will be less mature simply because they won't be used as much. And also, it's really important to keep in mind that, especially for those of you who have very, very heterogeneous SharePoint groups, SharePoint user groups, that you're going to have varying uptake within various groups. So the more technically savvy groups will pick up and run with all of the new functionality, and those who are less technically advanced will be a little bit slower to pick up on some of the more complex and advanced functionality. So even though you might have good uptake in a specific area, it's entirely possible that's being driven by a very small group of users and may not actually be representative for the entire user group. And also, it's really important to keep in mind that you can run into serious problems with legacy issues. Obviously, if you're running on the older SharePoint platforms, this can be a really major problem. It's also an issue if you've done a lot of custom development on SharePoint, and therefore you can't as gracefully upgrade and adapt and improve those areas. You may recall I talked a little bit about the tiers of SharePoint deployment, the tiers of SharePoint farms, SharePoint projects. Those can essentially be, I think, linked back to the three major SharePoint versions, of course, 3, 7, and 10 over the last 10 years, give or take. And I think the most interesting thing to take away from this particular view here is that, roughly speaking, SharePoint maturity is a function of time. The longer your SharePoint farm has been in place, the more mature it will be. But it's also really important to keep in mind that each generation does learn from the mistakes of the previous generation, so to speak. And that essentially means that there are less spread in the extremes. If you look at the third generation of SharePoint farms, there is less distance from the highest point to the lowest point, basically meaning that the farms are more mature in the way that they've been deployed, and it hasn't been so much a question of hitting the ground running and making things up as you go. So let's talk about a practical example, and I'd like to talk about search because that's the area that I know best. Now, let's just run through the 500-point scale here, specifically for search. This is taken from the original model. Do step in and take a look at that, by all means, in the original version. But basically, at the lowest level, you see out-of-the-box functionality, essentially, for queries, results, and scopes. Some additional content sources, maybe a file share or two, will be indexed in at this bottom level here. As we move up, we start to see custom scopes and iFilters employed, primarily, of course, the PDF iFilter, some custom scopes. So you'll probably find that the majority of your SharePoint implementations are probably somewhere towards the level 200. If for no other reason than you've been met with some requirements to do some custom scopes and have probably set up the PDF implementation. Moving further up, we start to get more mature, more effective in the way we're deploying search. We start to see search results that get analyzed, so we start to see them being displayed in different ways depending on the kinds of results that we have up. For example, people search is shown in one way, image search in another, and search for documents in an entirely third way. We start to see best bets and metadata being used here to aid the search experience. I gave you the example a little bit earlier, if you recall, of me using a best bet as a way to inform particular users that they should react in a specific way to a specific customer that they might be searching for. Very useful for SharePoint being used in a ticketing or support role. Also probably quite useful in a CRM style of role. But you could also use it to push out today's menu or something like that. But it's important because at this level you start to think of search as being a channel that you can use to communicate, not just a passive system that delivers results. Important to keep in mind that we're starting to move towards more active search where we develop a strategy for it and then we use the functionalities to actually realize that strategy. As we move up to level 400, we start to see content types and custom properties actually being used within SharePoint. In the SharePoint maturity model, Sadie makes the case that you see these being used in advanced search. Now, my point of view is that you should never use advanced search, that you should ensure that standard search is good enough for your users, but that's a slightly different question, so we'll leave the formulation as it is here. But the other key aspect at this level is that results are now customized to specific needs. So users who are viewing a specific kind of results are being shown them in a specific way. And finally, of course, at this level, results may be actionable. So users may actually be able to take concrete next steps with their results without having to go through additional interfaces to do it. So, for example, they may be able to send a link to a document without having to download it first, or something like that. And finally, right up at the top, here the key things are really about infrastructure, of course, that high volumes can be handled, talking hundreds of millions of documents at this level, and of course that you have some sort of automated tagging in place that can actually help you construct metadata in places where you may not have particularly good metadata. So what I'd like to do to kind of put this into perspective is focus in on level 400. We saw was defined as content types and custom properties are leveraged, ignoring advanced search, as I said, and that results are customized to specific needs and may be actionable. So what we need to do is we need to break this out into some action points, essentially. And those action points we can then work on to achieve, and once we've done that, we'll have moved up towards this level of maturity. So the three areas that we need to focus on here are, of course, how are we going to leverage content types and properties? How are we going to make custom properties available to our users in an effective way? And I'll be showing you how you can do that in standard SharePoint 2010. We'll be looking very, very briefly at some XML. Nothing too complex. I'll just show it to you and then move on. We have a great webcast that specifically covers how you can customize XML. Go into our website or simply just Google it. You'll see our webcast on YouTube dealing with how you can actually deploy custom properties into standard SharePoint using the XML. Then I'll be showing you how you can customize results to specific needs. I'll be showing you an example on a public-facing site where they've edited the XSL to actually display their results in a slightly different way based on the kind of result that's been brought back. And then finally, we'll take a little bit of a look at how you can actually achieve actionable results, either through XSLs or some JavaScript, or even going in and working a bit with .NET. But the key things that I want you to keep with us as we move on from here is that we're not going into code. I'm just going to show you some examples very, very quickly as we move through this so you can actually see specific real-world examples of how these three key goals of deploying custom content type and properties, deploying and customizing results to specific needs, and how you can make results actionable. I just want to show you some examples of those so you can sort of have some examples to hang those up on. So what we'll start off by looking at here is standard SharePoint 2010, and I'll show you really how we can go in and extend the SharePoint refiners. Again, I keep this very quick, very much of an overview, and as I said, do go in and take a look at our website to find the full webcast dealing with this specific topic. But basically what we need to do is we need to edit the standard SharePoint web part. We need to edit the XML, add a custom property that would then expose that particular piece of metadata to our users. We'd deploy it and of course do the bug fixing on it. Now we're looking at a standard SharePoint 2010 Search Center. So basically what I want to do is I would want to add in an additional metadata type into the refiner panel here on the left hand side to make that a little bit easier for my users to find and work with. Now in standard SharePoint the way that you do this is basically by going in and editing the page, bringing it up in edit mode essentially so that you can access the configuration on the individual web parts. This web part here, go in and open up the refinement panel here, and then we will have to edit this XML. I won't show you the details of this now. Check it out on our website if you'd like to know how to do it. Key thing to take away from this is you are working with the XML, so keep in mind you do need to bug fix, and you do need to have some competent people looking at the project for you. That will of course bring it up here, make it available. Of course you need to do this manually on the various search centers where you want to expose it, but you can do it with the standard SharePoint functionality, and that's really a key point to take away from this. If you're prepared to have the necessary staff available to do it for you, you can actually achieve a lot of the things that you would want to by using the standard functionality. Obviously, there is a bit of a cost associated with it, and it's important to keep that cost in mind. Okay, so the next element that I want to show you is how we can go in and get result pages that are changed up and styled and adapted so that we actually get more adaptive result pages that better match the corporate image that we have. I'll be showing you two real-world examples here, and essentially what we'll be focusing on here is the whole question of how do you customize these search and result pages so you get a more pleasing, a more user-friendly, and user-friendly version of them. So we'll be specifically looking at the ways that you can adapt XSLs to match your branding needs and your web presence, so you can actually get a SharePoint site that looks attractive. That's especially necessary when you're talking about public-facing sites, but it's also very, very valuable internally. People are more likely to adopt something that looks great than they are to adopt something that looks a bit clunky. We'll be looking at some of the ways that you can use XSL to drive content-specific logic in results, and I'll show you a specific example of what I mean there. And the key thing here is really to go in and look at the standard functionalities that are available in SharePoint and really get a feeling of what's available in out-of-the-box stuff before you start looking at external solutions. So let's take a look at the Wollongong Tourist Park website. This is an Australian tourism organisation. This is a SharePoint site, believe it or not. And we'll just go up here and we'll stick in a search term. Do a search for Tourist Parks Wollongong. They've got this great little widget here showing me some related searches. This isn't searches you type. It's just a lookup on certain terms they pre-populated to give users an indication of which way they should perhaps look. So we get some results up here, and they've done some fairly smart things with this page. Perhaps the most interesting thing is what we actually see here. You can see that they're actually leveraging their metadata to display labels on the specific results. Not on all of them, as you can see here, only in this case on a PDF. So where they've got the metadata, they'll display it. Where they don't, they won't. They're also using the metadata up here at the top of the page, as you can see, as a sort of a simplistic refiner. And this is, of course, all being done in the XSL layer. The results are rendered as they come back from the search engine, and then they're displayed in this more user-friendly way. The actual search result block here is perhaps not the most attractive in the whole world. It's a bit of a pity because they worked so hard on the rest of the page to make it look great, but the fundamentals are actually quite good because you do get this useful navigation So you can actually go in, assuming that it actually returns results for you, which it's not doing here because these are passively defined. The other example I want to show you is the Isaka website.